We have gun advocacy groups right here, of course, like the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Rod Giltaca is the president, and he joins us now. Rod, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So what would you do if you were in the NRA's shoes in the U.S. right now, given the climate?
Well, that's a tough question because the role of the NRA in the United States from the perspective of Canadians is really difficult to understand because the situation in the United States is completely different than the situation in Canada. Certainly a lot in the firearms community in Canada and in the States believe that the NRA are doing a really great job because their rights haven't been infringed to a certain extent, but it's really difficult to analyze what they do in comparison to what we do.
Is that part of it simply because of the Second Amendment, with the constitutional right to bear arms in the United States?
They have a constitutional right to have a firearm. That's right. That's enshrined, and they take that very seriously in the U.S. as they should. But the other situation is they're in a position where the NRA's mission is to block infringement. In Canada, we have a completely different situation where the gun control situation has already happened. We've lost a lot of those rights, and now we're trying to just, massage the laws so that they don't infringe on people and their activities at the same time as enhancing public safety. So it's a completely different perspective, if that makes sense.
Rod Giltaca is with us, the president of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, talking to us on Main Street on News Talk 980, CJME, 650 CKOM. And we're talking about how to advocate for gun rights. We've seen a lot of controversy going on down in to our southern neighbors, and we wanted to see what a good way to advocate really is. And of course, Canada's situation is very different. What's the biggest hurdle for you here? I know you were saying, of course, it's a different situation that these rights have already been gone. Where does that leave you when you're trying to advocate in Canada?
Well, what our group in particular is advocating for is a conversation that's never happened in Canada, and that is a mature, fact-based, honest discussion on what part of our laws and regulations have a direct effect on public safety and what laws and regulations don't. And it's an inflammatory topic, as you know, but that's what we're pushing for is a real good, honest discussion on that and how we can make changes for the better part of both sides of that conversation.
Rod, and even just the wording you're using, discussion. And
earlier
when you
often.
said, massage the gun laws, those types of things, it is a really substantive and stylistic difference from what we're typically used to seeing, say, from down south, because it is apples and oranges almost. What's the best way to advocate in your mind? Is it to hammer on the legal side of things? Is it to try to build consensus? What do you think is the best approach?
Well, what we've done in our group, because we're a fairly young group, but we're fairly well organized, and we felt that there was a gap in firearm advocacy in Canada, and that gap that we're filling is reflected in our mandate. And our mandate is to provide support, meaning just knowledge and facts and information to media, government, and to everyday Canadians that don't own guns. And it's, we're big fans of very rational thinking and fact-based arguments. And that's why we're here. We're here saying, we've got the facts backed up by Stats Canada and the CDC and a number of different, sources. And we're here to help articulate that so we can get kind of the win-win happening.
Rod Giltaca with us, president of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. We're talking about gun advocacy, basically gun rights advocacy. And one of the things I was wondering then, if you could tell me, if you could change one thing in Canada when it comes to firearms rights, what would it be?
Only one?
Just one. You only get to pick one, Rod.
Yeah, it's not an all-day show. If I would pick one, and it's not really one over another, but I think this one makes a lot of sense, and this would be a great example. Allow people to shoot their firearms on their own property if they live in an area where that firearm can be legally and safely discharged. So right now, you can do that with non-restricted firearms. Yep. I can take a 50 caliber semi-auto out to my farm and shoot at 1,000 meters with it. But if I take my handgun and shoot at 15 meters out in the farm, it's illegal for all intents and purposes. I can only go to a shooting range for that. And that's a great example of a win-win because you'd have less restricted firearms being transported because apparently that's a concern. and people would not be unduly, burdened with a law that was made or a regulation that was made in an irrational manner. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yep, I hear you.
Rod Giltaca is with us on Main Street on News Talk 980 CJME and 650 CKOM. He is the president of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. We were talking a little bit about gun control and different styles and approaches compared to what we've been seeing south of the border with the argument there, and especially in the wake of another mass shooting in the United States. Rod, how much of this is fear factor on both sides? You have one side going, oh, it's going to be dangerous. It won't be safe if too many people have guns. We need to make those restrictions. Why would you need a gun? And then on the other side, well, no, they're going to take my guns away. The government wants to restrict. Well, they're going to take my guns. How much of it is just kind of emotional reaction on both sides of the argument?
Well, I think one side, there is emotion on both sides because gun owners, if you look at gun owners, they're less likely to be found guilty of any crime whatsoever, or engage in any crime whatsoever than the general population. They're typically the most law-abiding, subgroup in our population. Yet they've been regulated and they've had firearms seized from them, and they've been made paperwork criminals on multiple times. So you've got a group that's been, me being among them, that's been constantly beat up by the actions of a handful of people in Canadian history. So that's why there's a lot of emotion on the firearm owner side. And on the other side, there's a lot of emotion being fueled by outrage and hysteria because of these terrible shootings. I mean, a lot of people die from a lot of things every year. I mean, you guys are well aware of that. But when it's a shooting, for some reason, it's wildfire. I mean, we're here talking about a shooting. Why? Because there was a mass shooting 4,000 miles away in another country, and now it's reignited a gun debate in Canada. So that's almost the answer in itself to your question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It sounds like a good dose of education would go a long way in actually being able to have a mature, fact-based conversation. It's hard when people can't decide what the facts are, and they're fueled by emotion.
And that's why we're here, and that's why thousands of people in only 8 months have funded the CCFR to do that work, because there was that gap in the firearms advocacy community. So that's why we're here.
Well, we appreciate that you are here, and of course we should mention you reached out to us after we had quite the train wreck of a conversation a little while back when we were trying to tackle gun control in the show. So we do appreciate you coming forward to help us walk us through some of the issues around gun control.
My pleasure, anytime.
That's Rod Giltaca, president of the Canadian Coalition of Firearms Rights.